Ja Haida Galas, Yahlnaaw Hanadi Kil KaahlGalangdal Haida Language Prince Rupert Yahlnaaw Qoya lately Tene Yahlnaaw. Hello, wonderful people. My name is Yahlnaaw. I'm from Skidegate Haida Language. I was born in Prince Rupert, and I am now working and living and attending UNBC, doing my master's here in Prince George on Lheidli T'enneh territory. And I'm also working here at the gallery as the Indigenous Programming Intern, as we all know now. Let me adjust this.
No, I couldn't have done it.
So before I go further, I want to acknowledge again that we're on the territory of the Lheidli T'enneh, and I would like to thank them for allowing us to work here and present here and have beautiful gatherings like this together. So, yeah, go wild. Delete them if I'm looking funky, though. So my presentation title is Kil KaahlGalangdal, which means hear someone's voice before you see them. Skidegate Haida Language Revitalization through story. So let's try that title together, friends. Follow me. We'll break it into pieces. So the first one is Kil KaahlGalangdal. Lovely, beautiful. So the purposes of me presenting for you today is to demonstrate how my master's work at UNBC influences the work that I/we do here at the gallery, and how the work that I/we, the team, do here at the gallery influences my master's work. So in the previous slide at the beginning, I told you who I am and where I come from. I situated myself in this space and in my work with you all. I do this because, as Cree author Sean Wilson says, it aids in building relationships with your readers, or in this case, my listeners. I believe that the knowledge we hold is derived from the relationships that we form throughout our living and learning journey. We don't just wake up one day as, for example, an academic and decide to study a certain topic. It's the experiences and the living beings held within those experiences that shape how we see our world and shape what we want to do. I hope you being here today will further shape your own personal worldviews in perhaps a different and new or unexpected way. So I am an Indigenous, queer, pansexual, transgender woman, navigating what often feels like a limb stretched into many worlds. And I aim to bridge these different epistemologies, ways of knowing, and ontologies, ways of being, into both my master's work and into my work here at the gallery. I also hope that bridging these different knowledges in will help also shape my learning journey in a new way. So this here is a photo of me at my bachelor's graduation in April of 2018. I'm wearing my button blanket and a cedar woven hat. On the blanket, we have two ravens, the raven being our clan, and one of our crests in the middle. You'll see the moon in the raven's mouth. We have quite a few different crests because our family is from a chief's family, Chief Skidans. So Tilgusi, family. This is my family. Let's try saying it. We'll break it into two pieces. Tilgu. I lied, 3. C. Beautiful. Say it all together. Tilgusi. Lovely. Augi wat hananangwa kiyaga. Bruce hanadi langwa kiyaga. Jasquan hanadi alwa kiyaga. Ginas glutsie hanadi doangwa kiyaga. Lucas hanadi kuga kiyaga. So this is my family. In the photo to your left, we have myself and my nanai, my grandmother. Her name is Augiwat. In the far photo, we have myself and my father. His name is Bruce. Next to him, my mother. Her name is Jasquan. My sister next to her. Her name is Gidat Glutsie. And my fiance, Lucas, at the end. That was a photo from our trip to Iceland last year. And we were all sleeping on the bus, so we're all looking a little rough, but it was a really good trip. So my nanai, also in the photo, she's the reason that I have the privilege of doing the work that I do today. She's my mentor and continuously guides me through my learning journey. And my family are also here tonight. They're in the back, and I'm always grateful for their support at various events. Wave, everyone's looking for you, so now you got a wave now. But I'm grateful that they could all be here today. So, Nai, this is my home. Let's hear it, Nai. Very simple, very elegant, one of the easier words. So my family line originally comes from the now abandoned village of Kuna, or as it's now known as Skidans. Skidans being the last chief at this village before everyone had to leave, hence that name. The reason that no one is there now is that there was a smallpox epidemic in the late, or I guess mid-1800s, and all the people were essentially told to leave. So what we have in the photo here, we have to the photo to the left, the remains of what's at Kuna right now. So you'll see some totem poles. The most prominent one is actually a potlatch totem pole. So each line going up it represents when a house or a family had another potlatch, which essentially was the, I don't know how to describe it, but it showed that they had power. It showed that they were willing to support their community and their family. So when the smallpox blankets were traded with the different communities on Haida Gwaii, the population dropped drastically, specifically Kuna. So we're not talking about a small incline. We're talking about this village alone going from 7,000 people to 75 in the span of a few months. Pretty much the entire nation was almost wiped out due to the warfare use of smallpox in this era. So this happened during my great-great-grandmother's lifetime. Her name is Skidegate Haida Language, just like my sister. And she lived to be 111, actually. So she got to see these changes that happened. She went from living a traditional Haida life in Kuna to learning that the different chiefs from the different villages had gathered and decided that wars between the different villages were to stop. There was to be peace, and all the Haidas were to move to 2 villages in order to preserve the population, which are the 2 villages we have today, which is Skidegate and Masset. So she witnessed all this, and she did not speak English until she was in her late 20s, upon more contact with settler people, and she eventually passed away at 111 in a Western hospital bed, with her last words being that of English. There was, as you can tell, an arrangement of various events that happened very quickly within her 100 years, going from not knowing that there were any other people in existence because the Haida people were secluded on a set of islands off the coast in which travel technologies had advanced, to her dying in a physical hospital with settler nurses, settler doctors. So yeah, there's that. So moving in to the rest of the presentation, this year was, or the previous year, 2019, was labeled as the International Year of Indigenous Languages, which is fantastic, but obviously this needs to be bridged out to each and every year due to the state of so many different Indigenous languages on the land we now call Canada. So a point I like to make is when I say on the land we now call Canada, I'm stating that Canada wasn't always Canada, and therefore I refer to it as such. It became Canada when settler people came to this land. My passport says that I'm Canadian, but I am not Canadian. I'm Haida. My people were Haida. I'm from Haida Gwaii, and we were forced to become this conception of Canadian upon colonization. So there are approximately 60 Aboriginal languages belonging to 11 major language families, 10 being First Nations and Inuktitut. So I have the list there. You can kind of see like a vague diagram where all these different Indigenous language families and nations come from. So what we now call BC is home to 60% of Indigenous languages, and there are 34 unique languages. So 60%, that leaves only 40% of the Indigenous languages on the land we now call Canada for the rest of Canada outside of what we now call BC. I pointed out a few here on this little map so we could get an idea of where some of them are coming from, but that is definitely not the complete list. All of these language families are recovering from the wrath of colonization. William J. Mussel from the Stolo Nation states that colonization occurs when one people is conquered by another people through destroying and/or weakening basic social structures in the conquered culture and replacing them with those of the conquering culture. Languages were taken away, and therefore aspects such as belief, spirituality, medicine, education were also taken away. Social structures were destroyed and replaced with colonial structures, building the colonial society that we see today. So now, I want you to think back to the story of Kuna, of the population drop, of the chiefs gathering, of my Nanai seeing all of these changes happening over her 111 years on this earth. The Haida language is unique, and it's not shared with any other language families anywhere in the world. This is primarily due to the fact, as I mentioned, that the Haida people were on an island in the Pacific, or a collection of islands in the Pacific, and travel technologies hadn't quite advanced until later on, whether it be between settler people or other indigenous nations, until much more recently. Even now, traveling down Hecate Strait in a modern big boat can be rough, and my parents can both attest to that. Whereas on the mainland, you'll find that there are many shared language families and dialects stemming from many different nations. Also likely because there was a lot of contact, there was a lot of overlap. We just talked about, 60% of Canada's Indigenous, what we now call Canada's Indigenous languages, being in BC. There was a lot of overlap, there was a lot of contact, therefore creating a lot of different worldviews and a lot of different, for example, trading technologies. So prior to colonization and the wrath of smallpox, as we discussed, there were 13 different villages and therefore 13 different Haida dialects. They were essentially the same language, and the differences were mostly held within pronunciation. Or for example, as languages develop, there are new words that come to surface for new things, just like we have now when new things come out, like a cell phone, right? Things like that. So when the villages were forced to relocate into two, Skidegate and Masset, all these dialects were condensed from 13 different dialects to 2. So when I'm learning my language with my nanay, which we're going to get into a little bit more, and we can't remember a word, for example, we'll go to look in our Skidegate Haida Language Dictionary or Glossary, which is kind of like a gigantic, it's a very thick book of all the different words and phrases that we have. It comes with CDs or online resources, so you can actually hear our fluent speakers speaking it. But sometimes we'll look for a word in the Skidegate Haida language, and there's going to be sometimes 13, sometimes 80 different ways to say a single type of thing. And the reason being is that we had so many different dialects and so many different parts of languages being mushed into 2. So even though we say we're speaking the Skidegate Haida language, a lot of the different words are brought in from all these other villages, which are now also abandoned, which is a really unique thing to learn, but can be confusing when you're learning a language because there's like 12 different ways to say walking, and depends on context and how the person looks and all those other beautiful things. So when all of these languages came together, the worldviews that encompassed them came with it, including the aspect of story. So stories and our language work in tandem. We can't have stories without our language because that is how we should tell our stories in our Skidegate Haida language. We cannot have language without our stories because our stories and histories are where our language has come from these processes that I spent a while thinking about. My master's thesis began to emerge from what felt like a jumble of theoretical frameworks and diagrams and methodologies that I had gathered from other Indigenous scholars. So my master's thesis topic is Skidegate Haida Language Revitalization through traditional storytelling, simply put. So I saw this post on Facebook a while ago, and I wanted to put it in here because I think it makes an important point. This was revolving around what's happening on Wet'suwet'en territory and the pipelines and land protection. And it says, today I was asked, what is most important to Indigenous people? The land, protecting your traditions, your language, or your people? And I told him, those are all the same things. In 2014, before I actually started my master's, which only started in 2018, September, I took initiative to begin orally recording some of as many of it as I could of our Skidegate Haida stories from my nanay, from my grandmother, primarily because in her own words, she kept saying, I'm gonna die soon and you need to know these. So I set out to begin orally recording these. These stories are not just our stories, like I said. They are our history, our future, and depict a way of life which has been battling eradication since colonial contact. So during the summer of 2017, after collecting quite a few of these stories, I enrolled in a program through the University of Northern British Columbia that encompassed a language learning technique that was similar to First Peoples Cultural Council's Mentor Apprentice program. So the Mentor Apprentice program is where you take a mentor or a fluent speaker and you pair yourself with them, you being the apprentice, and you learn your language through language immersion. So essentially, there are many different ways to go about it, but basically, if you read the book, it essentially tells you to spend about 10 hours a week with your mentor and speak only in the language. And at the beginning, obviously, that's going to be a little rough because sometimes you don't quite have the vocabulary to articulate what you want or to understand what your mentor is trying to tell you. So you spend this time together, and it involves a lot of acting things out, pointing to things, bringing books together. And when you're learning a whole new language and you're twisting your mouth and your tongue in so many complex ways that it can be difficult. There was one point where I was in Skidegate and I was at my aunt's house and we had just finished at the language house there a full day and I got the hiccups and the hiccups wouldn't go away. And then I had the hiccups for literally more than 24 hours to the point where medical attention was needed. And let me tell you, it's embarrassing to go into the hospital and say that, help, I can't stop hiccuping. And they're like, how old are you? And you're like, 21. So it's a lot of work, but it's definitely worth it. So these stories that we had been recording then became the foundation of what I'm doing for my master's thesis today, which was my Nanai's idea. As I mentioned, she's my mentor and she guides me through everything. And I sat down upon applying for my master's and I said, what should I do? And she said, you need to use these stories. So I'm using these stories. So this is a photo of myself and my master supervisor, Adosti, to your right, and then my friend, Nikki Tavelli. We are all in the Master Apprentice program together, or Mentor Apprentice program it's now called, and we're all working with our mentors to learn our Indigenous languages. So we're gonna have a little brain break here because it's been a while. And I hadn't planned to do this, and then Twyla went and mentioned it on the radio, so now y'all have to do it. So something we've been doing every Tuesday morning, I bring a phrase or a sentence or a word to our weekly meetings, and we all learn it, and then we can use it in the workplace. So for a few weeks, we had worked on putting together the Head and Shoulders song, but doing it in Haida. So now we're going to do it today. So it'll be a fun exercise. It'll get us moving. Don't think about it too hard. It's for fun. And like we talked about as we're getting into, my presentation revolves around language and language learning. So let's put some of that language to use in this space. We'll go over some of the basics here just so we know. And then when we move on to the next slide, I've got a little video that Roxanne put together for us that has me doing it. The words flash. There's a little tune. Just read it and you'll be okay. So we'll start. So we've got head, which is kaji. Kaji. Beautiful. Shoulders, skull. Skull. Lovely. We got your knee, which is the harder one, which is ulu. Beautiful. Ulu. Lovely. And then your toes, which are staken. Lovely. And then we got eyes, which are hangai. Lovely. We got ears, which are gyu. And we have nose, which is kun. And a funny little thing, you notice that toes are staken and nose is kun. Kun is kind of just like a small appendage on your body. So funny little side note. Okay. Okay, friends, stand up. Get ready. Get limber. Let's hope this works. I think so. I think we got it set up. Yeah, so as it plays, I do a little intro because we post it onto some social media. Then it'll ask if you're ready, and then be ready. And as you do it, just look at the words, just say them. It's going to sound like a hot mess, but it's going to make me real happy. So I'll see if this sound's going to work. Hi everyone, my name is Yahlnaaw and I'm from Skidegate Haida. I'm going to teach you how to do the Head and Shoulders song in Haida Kith, in the Skidegate Haida language. Kajisqa, Koloetstaken, 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 Kajisqa, Koloetstaken, Chalai, Kil KaahlGalangdal. To work, thank you. So, diving back into it, I hope you're feeling refreshed. In order to frame this work that we've been talking about, this language revitalization through story, I decided to develop a conceptual framework that strayed away from a standard colonial framework. I didn't want to cram this cultural knowledge that was being gifted to me by my Nana and other fluent speakers in my community and cram that into a colonial framework of how research should be done. I wanted to design a framework that was better suited for my own Haida worldview. I won't go through the whole framework, so it's like 5 pages in my proposal, but I'll give you an outline of it. So in the Haida culture, my elders frequently tell me about how cedar is a valued and sacred resource. Oftentimes, this knowledge is given to me in the form of story. Cedar is used to make things from houses to clothing to canoe. If you ask anyone in the Skidegate Haida culture, like, where did your culture come from, they're going to tell you it came from cedar, because cedar is what created everything. A prominent Haida saying that you will often hear one say is "Tu Kaahlga," which means cedar is sister or cedar sister. Let's try saying that one together. So the first word is "Tu Kaahlga." Beautiful, and that just means cedar sister or cedar is sister. It is referring to the fact that cedar is every woman's elder sister, providing for all of our material needs, or in my case, all of my theoretical needs, adapting it to a different way of looking at it. So my Haida conceptual framework of Tu Kaahlga is a metaphorical framework using the tu, which is the western red cedar tree, to describe my language learning journey. Sean Wilson, who I talked about at the beginning, states that stories and metaphor are prominently used in Indigenous societies, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to bridge metaphor and story into this work, into this framework of Tu Kaahlga. So this is a photo of the being that represents Tu Kaahlga from Terry Lynn Williams Davidson's book, which is called Magical Beings of Haida Gwaii. The story of Tu Kaahlga goes as follows. She is the older sister to woman and the ally to warriors. She exists in every part of our lives. She protects us, provides for us, and teaches us to draw strength from community so that we can always give back. She teaches us to listen for the voices of our ancestors so that we remember their teachings always. So in the picture, as stated in the book on the next page, Terry Lynn says, Cedar Sister appears standing among her older sisters with her arms stretched up towards the light. Her dress is simple and elegant, made of burlap with cedar bark roses coming down her shoulder. She's also wearing a red cedar bark headband covered with abalone shells to honor the relationship between forests and oceans. So as you could see, this language revitalization through story research encompasses everything that social media post touched on. It touched on language, land, traditions, and people. So my research question, which I put in this framework, is how does learning stories in my Skidegate Haida language contribute to my language learning journey, and how can these processes be adapted for other second language learners? I wanted my gathered research to not only benefit myself and my community, but I want it to be adaptable to other communities and other nations so that other second language learners can benefit from these different processes as well. We have a responsibility as Indigenous people who have all felt the wrath of colonization to support each other and to keep deconstructing the building blocks of colonialism. And that was an important point for me in this design. I used this story in one of my other presentations here, and I wanted to articulate, in a regard to articulating why we need everyone to work together, and I want to use it again here. So during one of my visits to Skidegate, Nana and I were at the Skidegate Haida immersion program, And the elders were trying to figure out a word that was missing from our dictionary. Everyone was thinking and thinking, at first on their own, very quietly. Then people began chatting, and people then began talking, and then you could hear stories being told, both traditional stories and both personal stories. And then eventually there was an uproar as this word was kind of just chanted over and over again. A word that was lost had been found. It had been brought back to life. And it was found simply because everyone in their room put their minds together for a similar purpose, for a similar goal, and used the aspect of story to recall when this word could have been used. Shortly after, my uncle Roy, who's my nanai's older brother, he's in the photo here, then said, when you put a group of people in the same room for the same purpose, goal, and outcome, something beautiful will happen. And something beautiful did happen. We all live in reciprocal relationships with each other. We are all intended to shape each other's worldviews in various ways. And in this case, those who are here now and our ancestors who intended our languages, stories, and cultural knowledge to be passed down. So during the fall semester of 2017, an elder from my community, or Diane Brown, came to UNBC as our elder in residence, which was a program that we were holding there at the time. She was there for a week. So during this time, her and I were able to spend quite a bit of time together talking about my upcoming possible master's research, because the deadline was in the December of 2017 and she was there in September. So we were able to talk about language, we were able to talk about story. She was able to help me frame my proposal and what I wanted to do. And it was during this time that she taught me the Haida rules for living, or in other words, it could be adapted in regard to ethics. So we have Yahlnaaw, which is respect, Kil KaahlGalangdal, which is make it right, which means everything depends on everything else, and laguga kans, which means responsibility. The direct translation for responsibility, if you were to translate it word for word, is leaning on your own chest, which I think is a beautiful way of putting it. So it's these rules that guide my ethical considerations for this research, and not only just for the research, but frame my worldview, frame how I see and interpret different things. So upon completion of this thesis, I will have my written thesis and a digital oral cache, I guess, of all of these stories that Nanai and I have been working on. And I will be giving it. It's my responsibility to give it to the Skidegate Haida Immersion Program so they can use it in furthering their preservation of language and stories, and also to help other second language learners there. So this is a photo of the Skidegate Haida Immersion Program on Orange Shirt Day when Nana and I were there last. Nana's here, I'm there, her brother's there. She doesn't like looking at the camera though, but we were all present, which was beautiful. So when I was hired for this position in September 2019, I was really able to bridge aspects of my master's work into this workspace. I mean, I wasn't just allowed, I was encouraged to. One of my first tasks was to design a tour for the exhibition at the time, Redress, Sacred Obligation, Indigenous Voices on Reconciliation, which we talked about in the opening of the AGM. I was asked to interpret these pieces essentially from within my own Haida worldview and present it in a way that made sense to a variety of people of different and very diverse backgrounds. And I think of everything depends on everything else when I was framing how I was going to present that. I was also responsible for creating a hands-on project to do with our tour groups after they had gone through the exhibition. And I chose to do little hand drums, because hand drums are used for many purposes in my culture and a lot of other Indigenous coastal cultures. And they represent many things, and they have many purposes in culture, whether it be music, song, dance, and in some cases they're used as a form of communication between people or between people here and our ancestors in the spirit world. And my most recent task has been to design and deliver our Learning from Sharing, a series of voices on diversity. So the aim of this series is to bring in people of various backgrounds to share knowledge around diversity, inclusion, Indigenous knowledges, LGBTQ2+ knowledges, and community building. So the goal is essentially to help educate staff here at Two Rivers Gallery on where different people come from. And we were able to extend this invitation to other nonprofit or for-profit and government agencies in Prince George. So we live in a community that's so diverse, and we work with many different people from many different places. And it's important for organizations such as this to design programs suited for what these people want. And that was essentially the goal. Another program that I've been working within is Maker Lab Youth Immersion, which I find is a safe space for youth to come and engage in art with community, with local artists. And there's a mandate stating that there must be 50% Indigenous youth attendance, which I think is really great. And further, upon my first session with the youth, I learned that it was really just an army of queer Indigenous people who had voices and had purposes, and they had things to say, and they were going to slam their fists down until they said it, which was really beautiful. It was inspiring to see so many young queer people embracing themselves and what they want, and what they want for their futures. So a photo, you saw a similar one earlier of the exhibition of Redress. I find it really almost like homey to look at because I spent a lot of time in there. So it became a very homey space, and Megan can attest to it. But when we were deinstalling, I was very sad about it. So, as I stated in my introduction, I'm an Indigenous, queer, pansexual, transgender woman. So many labels. Lots of people will not use labels to identify themselves, but I sometimes find comfort in them simply for the purposes of education. These are terms, these are words, these are descriptors, and this is what I'm going to tell you about it, essentially. I often kept this part of my life out of my work. I had fears of my work being judged harshly or being deemed as inappropriate, perhaps, if I included this within my research, because anyone who's been within the academy knows how abrupt and cold it can definitely be. So I have a little excerpt here that I've said at the start of this presentation, and I'm going to say it again. However, this excerpt is from a paper that I recently published, which I called Ta'tigong, which means stuffing a jar full. I stated, I am my work because my work would not exist without me. I did not wake up one day and decide on a research topic and carry on to my master's to fulfill a random topic. My experiences that I brought to the table of my research and work shape who I am and therefore shape my work because they are the same thing. My work is biased and personal, and it is beautiful. As much as you want to believe that your work is objective and free from bias, you need to reconsider your own biases because the experiences that shape who you are directly influence your work. Your work would not exist without you and your experiences. I believe a huge component of why I include this part of myself in my work stems from the people and the atmosphere here at Two Rivers Gallery. When I saw the job posting, and I like telling the story because this is a good time, it was essentially asking for a queer Indigenous person to apply, and I looked at my fiance Lucas and I was like, I'm really queer, I'm Indigenous, maybe I should do this. And I went to the job interview and I felt safe. And then I said it out loud. The first time I had ever said it out loud, I said that I'm an Indigenous, queer, pansexual, transgender woman, and I'm here to stir the pot. And instead of what is often met with kind of like looks of confusion or like what's happening, it was interest. It was these people being intrigued. They wanted to learn more. And Twyla told me the interview would be 20 to 30 minutes, and then 2 hours later, I was walking out feeling really good about what happened, but also nervous, thinking, did I just ramble for 2 hours and did it not make sense at all? But the gallery provided me a safe space to bridge these knowledges that we've been talking about alongside these queer knowledges into a space with people who want to learn more about these different types of knowledges and issues to make us as an institution more aware so we can adapt, so we can be more inclusive, so we can design programs to suit these people who want these specific programs. And in turn, I was able to bridge this openness that I have now into my master's work. I decided, well, if the institution doesn't want it, then they can suck it. I'll give what I have and we'll see where we go from there. And it's definitely been a battle within the institution, especially within this framework that I've designed to fit my research into, because of course, at first look from the first person who looked at my proposal was like, no, this won't work. And I sat down and had a good hour meeting and I was like, this is why it's going to work and this is why it has to work. And I don't know, we'll see where it goes. Hopefully that meeting went well. But so there's a reciprocal relationship, as I've talked about, between my work here and my master's work. They hold hands, they support each other. So you're attending a presentation at a gallery for an arts association. So tell me, what kind of art do you do and why do you do it? And if you don't put up your hand, I'm going to pick someone because that's what I do. You buy art. Why do you buy art? Same. I love that. Who does art here? Yes, Twyla. Beautiful, yes. So other people can see this is how it's interpreted. This is what's happening. I saw someone over here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful, preserving those voices. That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Howard for sharing that. Anyone else? Yeah. Mm. That's beautiful, though. You're like, this is how it actually is. It isn't as sad as people portray it to be, and I want people to know that. Great. And you, I saw you hesitantly.
Growing up, I never had the opportunity to do art, and so finding it in my adult life has been really rewarding. And I mean, there's lots of different mediums that I work with, but mostly fabric, and I do a lot of costume design.
Mm-hmm.
Have helped with some local productions, and I find that it's really rewarding to think up an idea and have it transform into what you think, just fulfilling the image in your mind. And I think that's
Right.
something that's really awesome. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as deep as everyone else, but it brings me great joy.
No.
It's something that I like.
That's beautiful. I often feel that way about things unrelated to everything else, but what you said resonated because I always have like these really cool ideas for things in my head, but I could never do them. So I like that you're able to do that. You're able to fulfill that. So yeah, Hawa, so we use it, what did we talk about? We talked about expressing ourselves or preserving a moment or finding voices or portraying voices or showing something how it truly is and not how people make it to be. representing or mimicking something that we thought was beautiful or something that caught our attention, and perhaps, but maybe unintentionally, to give people after us a glimpse into the life of us, into our worldviews, into something that we thought was beautiful, a person that we thought was intriguing, or some idea that we formulated in our head that we were able to build or create. And thinking about that, that's why we have these huge museums or art galleries all over the world. They are preserving history and giving us museum goers insight or a glimpse of insight into the life of someone or something long before us, whether it be a landscape that someone thought was beautiful, or like I said, a person someone thought was intriguing, or the scene of a battle so that everyone would know who won the battle, right? Aspects such as that. This photo, I just kind of inserted in here because I don't like texty slides. I just like to have some visuals. But it's a photo from my parents' last house in Prince Rupert. I took it from their deck, and that was my, I don't know, it was probably my last visit. Probably my last visit there. And it was when Nana and I were really putting together the pieces of Aiga, which was the theoretical framework. So another photo, which I want to explain first, is the remains of where my great-great-grandmother lived at Una. So I'm not positive of this, but when I was there, the tour guide, who was also a cousin, said that this is where the chief would have lived, and we're from a chief's family, so this would have been the house where my great-great-grandmother would have lived. So you can see the center pole in the middle, and you can see the two support beams on either side. You can see how it's dipped down into the ground to support the board panels against the big winds that we can get right off the coast, because the ocean is just in front of it a little bit. Our longhouses were not so much anymore, but they were designed to be able to be taken apart within a day by 10 people and transported wherever they needed to go. So houses could be deconstructed and reconstructed in a matter of days. For example, when this epidemic happened with the smallpox, I'm sure that was something that came in handy. So the stories that I'm recording, and the stories, how do I put this? The stories that I'm recording and learning carry the language of my ancestors. In the same way, as we talked about, art carries down the history of multiple aspects, which you have all just told me. We all know that art comes in many forms: a painting, a sculpture, a story. But art in any realm can provide insight into a world long before us. It is our doorway to understanding our people, our ancestors, where we come from, and perhaps that will guide us to where we need to go. The reference in my title, Hearing Someone's Voice Before You See Them, is alluding to the voices of our ancestors being passed down through story and therefore language before meeting them again in the afterlife. Through these stories and our language, we are hearing our ancestors before we see them again. They are guiding us. They are living in reciprocal relationships with us. We, as humans, have a responsibility to ourselves in understanding where we come from, which we use to influence where we are going and who we are. We have a responsibility of building our identity, and we have a responsibility, in whatever form it may be, story or art, to honor our ancestors. That responsibility, leaning on your own chest, coming from within. We essentially, we're the ancestors of the future. In 100 years, we're going to be the ancestors of the future. And I want to ask you to give the generations after you the gift of knowledge and insight into where they come from, and hope that they'll use that to guide themselves to where they need to go. Hala, thank you. I think I'm supposed to ask if anyone has questions. I don't know. Am I supposed to? Hala. Yeah.